So let's do a little bit of comparison between Photoshop, which is the focus of this class, and Photopea, which is a free program you can use in a Chrome browser or on a Chromebook. So I want you to kind of know both. For my classroom, I want students to be able to bounce back and forth between either program. So we're going to look at the comparison of the two and then see what the differences are and what's similar. So let's take a look at just the basic tools. As we're looking here at the tools in Photoshop, when you hover over a tool, it will tell you what the tool does. It'll also show you in parentheses what the shortcut key is to that tool. For instance, the Move tool, the top tool, shortcut key is V. Now I'm going to create a new document. I'm in Photoshop at the moment. To create a new document in Photoshop, you go to File and then New, right here. And when you go to File New, it's going to ask you some questions. And over here you can see mine is saying what size do I want it to be. So I'm just going to start off and type in 500 pixels by 500 pixels. That will make a square. For the moment, I'm just going to leave the resolution at 72. Here's the color mode. You generally are going to work in RGB color mode, so I'll leave that alone too, and a white background will be fine. I'm going to hit Create. And then we have a nice little white rectangle. Now, in here, I am under a specific workspace called the Essentials workspace. Now I'm going to hit Reset Essentials because this is what it comes in looking as. Of course, you wouldn't have my picture over here. There's a Learn tab over here. But you can see here, there's all these little arrangements of things. And when I click on them, they switch to the other ones. These little dudes are called panels. Panels. And in Photoshop, you can take those panels, like this Layers panel, and scoot them around if you want to, and you can put them back. Okay, so these are called panels, and the arrangement of those panels is called a workspace. Now, let's go to Photopea and do the same thing. So I'm going to open up Photopea. I guess it could be Photopea, I don't know. And then you click New Project to create a new project, or you can still go to File and New. Now it says we have to tell it what size we want. So once again, I'll do 500 by 500. DPI, that's dots per inch. That's the same thing as resolution in Photoshop. 72 is what we had in Photoshop, so we'll do 72 here as well with a white background. So at this point, we are the same. Now what you're going to notice in Photopea is we do have an ad that plays over here on the right-hand side, so you can just ignore that. And then when it sets up, here we go. Again, we have a rectangle in the corner, or square. And then over here on the side, we do have panels. So there's the Layers panel, Channels and Paths, same panels that we had over in Photoshop. And then some differences up here. For instance, in Photoshop, we default had a color panel. Now, we can go to Window here, but there is no workspace because there are no specific workspaces in Photopea. There's only one. However, if we go to Window, we can access the color panel. So once I clicked on Window and Color, it gives me color up here in addition to these other ones that we already had listed. So that's basically how they're alike. The top tool is again the Move tool. It looks a little different. It's a big white arrow with that little four-sided compass arrow beside it instead of the four-sided arrow by itself. Notice when I hover over the keys here in Photopea, it's going to still give me the shortcut key, which is still V. It's in parentheses. And same thing as you work down here. Okay, so essentially the setups are the same. We cannot pick these up. I don't know why we can't. I wish they'd make it so you can. We cannot pick these up and scoot them around in here. That's just not something that you can do in Photopea. Okay, so back over here, again, you can see these are essentially the similar things. Here's my color panel that's already here. And let's go back and look again. Here's this color panel. My head was out of the way. You'd see we still have access to all of the colors up there. So let's go ahead and just look at some of the basic tools. Now, one of the things that you need to note is in Photopea, automatically this transform controls is going to pop up. Transform controls is what puts these little squares around things. I'm going to turn that off for now, only because that is not the default in Photoshop. But when I'm on the Move tool in Photoshop, I do still have the option for showing transform controls. However, it only shows it around objects. And right now, the only thing I have in this document is a background. Now in Photopea it's the same way, but for some reason it puts the transform controls around it. in there as well. So just understand you could use those transform controls or you could turn them off. So let's go down some of the buttons and compare them. This first button, as we said, is the move button. That's your home base. That's basically, if you need to move anything, you're going to use the move button. So it's kind of what you always come back to when you're not using a tool. The second thing, notice if I click and hold these buttons, I get additional options. So this one here is called the rectangular marquee tool. Now if I pop over to Photopea, this tool has different name. If I click and hold, I only have two options and it's called the rectangle select tool. But basically, it selects in a rectangular fashion. So if I wanted to only take this area where my head is in a square and select that area, I can use that rectangle select tool. The one below that, if I click and hold, in Photopea we have lasso select, and then we have two other lassos, the polygonal and the magnetic lasso. In Photoshop, if I click and hold the lasso, same situation. We have the lasso tool. They don't call it the lasso select tool, but it's the same thing. And then we have the polygonal and the magnetic lassos. You'll learn about the selection tools later on. The next button down depends on what was last clicked on your computer. If you click and hold, the paintbrush with the blob next to it is the quick selection tool. You paint over things to select them with the quick selection tool, and hidden underneath it is the magic wand. Going back over here to our other program, if I click on that, it looks like a bean because this is called the object selection tool, which is supposed to select an object. Below that is the quick selection tool, like in Photoshop, and then also the magic wand, like in Photoshop. So we have a third object selection. We have an object selection one that we do not have in Photoshop in Photopea. I'm going to click on quick selection just so it matches my Photoshop one. Okay, both of them have a crop tool, which probably makes sense to you if you've ever used any graphics programs. We're going to skip some of these because we'll get to them in later chapters, but here is the brush tool, looks like a paintbrush. And then a couple buttons down is an eraser tool. And if you click and hold, we do have various types of erasers to use. Now going back over to the other, if I come to the paintbrush tool, again, we have a brush or a pencil or color replacement, and then a couple buttons down is your eraser. We have two erasers, the eraser tool and the background eraser here in Photopea. Okay, continuing on, we're going to go ahead and down to the T, which is your type tool. That's how you add words. You click the type tool, and then come over to your document and click to be able to create text. You get a cursor, and then you type in the text. It makes a layer over here in your layers panel because text is automatically on its own layer. And you have to press check mark to sit the text down. Then you can go back to your move tool and move your text around. In Photoshop, same situation. Click on the type tool. Come over here and click one time to create point text. Type in your word and hit your check mark to set it down. It makes a layer, as you can see here, and same story, I can go to my move tool and move it around. Now I won't get into changing the fonts and all of that, but up here at the top is your options bar where you can modify the font, the size, and the color. If we go back to Photopea, again you have to switch back to your type tool to get these options. Same story, we have the place for your fonts, the size, and the color. So these are all going to be up here at the top when you're clicked on the type tool. Again, the options bar is at the top and the options bar changes based on what you're clicked on. So again, if I go back to that move tool, that's where I get those transform controls. But if I'm not on the move tool, I don't have those controls because I don't have that button to click. Okay, continuing on, we have the rectangle tool. If you look here, it looks like a rectangle. If I click and hold in Photopea, I have a rectangle, an ellipse, circle, a line, a parametric shape or polygon, and then custom shapes. And if I click on a custom shape, then up here, I have access to shapes, mini shapes. So let's look at that in Photoshop. Find the rectangle. And my rectangle's not on top because, you know, once you've clicked on these, it's to a different shape or to a different tool. But there's the rectangle tool. If I click and hold, rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, line, same kind of thing. And then we have one called the custom shape tool. And then again, same thing, there's a little box up here and I can click the drop down to get to additional shapes. And even here, click a gear to get to more categories of shapes. Like so. So that's pretty similar in both of the programs. just a different name. Well, custom shape is the same in both. All right, and then down here at the bottom is your zoom tool. If you click on your zoom tool, you have it either on plus or minus, and then you can just click, click, click to zoom in, and then minus, click, click, click to zoom out. If we're in Photoshop, same story. Click, 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 minus, click, click, click to move those around. Bonus information, the hand tool is used to pick up and scoot things over visually. So for you as a working person working on this project, if you need to scoot it over so you can see it better, that's what that is. Don't get that tool confused with the move tool. The hand tool has to do with just you working on it, being able to see it, whereas the move tool actually moves things around. Okay, and that's the same in both programs as we showed. And then finally, the overlapping squares. These overlapping squares on Photoshop are up and down on top of each other squares in Photopea. These are your color pickers. So if I click on the top one of the color picker, this is going to be the foreground color. That means if I type text, it will be that color. So let's say I go here and click on a blue. Now you have to come click and pick a color. See how this is still black? I got to come here and click a color to make it blue. If I hit OK and go to my type tool and click, I can type, oh, it didn't do it. I can type more text. Sometimes the type tool doesn't take and it works for the shapes. But I can double click and use the type tool's color picker up here. And then come up and pick a color and hit OK. When it's highlighted, you can't see the color, but there it is. So if you're drawing shapes, let's go over here and pick the rectangle. Up here, it has its own color picker. So if I want to draw a blue rectangle, then I'm going to have to choose that fill color and then draw my rectangle. And then again, notice each of these items that I'm creating makes their own layers in the Layers panel. Let's go to Photoshop and do the same thing. So I'm going to click back on my type tool. I'm going to click on the top box. Top is always foreground color. I'll choose red here and hit OK. I'll click. Yeah, this one doesn't change either. So there's my black up here. Once I hit OK, I can come and change the color. If you don't hit OK, you have to highlight the words to change the color, by the way. But if you've hit OK, you don't have to. And there you go. Same situation, two different programs working basically the same. The background color is the color that you would get if you erased. So if I erased on here, it would turn black. That's the background color. We don't use the background color for too much. All right, so once again, let me go ahead and draw another shape. Same situation here. Our shape is going to have its own fill at the top. You can choose whatever color you want. Photoshop usually remembers what your last color was and sticks it up there. And then you can draw your shape. Again, over here in your Layers panel, you're going to see your shape. So, shapes and text create their own layers in Photoshop and in Photopea when you add them. Likewise, if you add in another picture from somewhere, that's going to go on its own layer. But not everything goes on its own layer, as you're going to learn. The paintbrush tool does not go on its own layer. So if I take my brush tool, and there's my size, and my color is red, and I start trying to draw, first off, it says, no, you can't draw. This is a rectangle. And if I click on the type one, it says, no, you can't draw. This is text. So what I would have to do is draw in the background. And if I do that, this will be glued to the background and I can't pick it up and scoot it around. So to be able to scoot it around, I need to make a new layer first. Now I'm going to scoot this up because you can't see it otherwise on my screen. But down here at the bottom, we have some buttons. This button here next to the trash can is the Create a New Layer button. So before I use a brush, I'm going to create a new layer. Now we'll get into the details of brushes later on, but I'm going to make a bee. Oops, with my brush tool in here. And notice how these said rectangle and more and the words I typed. Brushing doesn't. You're just putting some pixels on there in paint. And so it does not name it. But you can double click to name it yourself. I'll name it brush. And now let me go into Photopea and let's see what it looks like in here. So same situation, I've got to create a layer. Let me undock this a bit so that I can get to the button. So here's the button. I've made my new layer. And now I'm going to click with my brush. make sure I'm on my regular brush, pick my color for on top, and then draw my shape. Again, if I'm clicked on the shape layer in here, it yells at me and says, layer is not editable. You can't edit that layer. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at some buttons. And let me fix my screen again here so we can see them. Some buttons that are at the bottom of the layers panel. Now before we go on, one other important thing to note, and let me just draw another shape. I'm going to click and hold and draw an ellipse this time. I'll make it red. Oops, I can't make it red yet, or I changed the color of my rectangle, didn't I? I'll draw it first. So I'm going to draw my circle and then make it red. Take my move tool and position it. The order that you draw them in is going to put them on top of each other. So if you want this red to be behind, if you want to send it back, you have to drag the layer in the layers panel down below. So that's how that works. Okay, so the order of the layers is what's going to make one shape be on top of the other shape. Or text, you know, that text, if I go and click on this text layer and move it, it's going to disappear because it's down below this blue layer. So the order of the layers do matter. If you can't see something, it might mean that you just don't have the layer up high enough. There's also eyeballs here. These are your visibility. So you can turn something off. If you're like, you know, I'm not sure I want to have that shape there, you can just turn that eyeball off or turn it back on. Same situation here in here. If I want to, I can hit the eyeball to turn something on or off. Okay, so now to the buttons, the rest of the buttons. So let's go ahead and look at, let me click on my blue rectangle. We're going to look at these buttons down here, but before we do, let's look at one button up here, and that's this one called opacity. Opacity has to do with how see-through something is. Actually, it has to do with how solid something is. The word opacity is for opaque, and if something is opaque, it's not see-through. So opacity of 100 means not see-through. If I pull this down, look how we start to see through the rectangle now. And if I pull it down even lower, we can see through it even more. So that's the opacity. How opaque something is what that percentage does. We kind of call it the transparency value. So that's opacity. And then down here at the bottom, we're only going to look at a few of these right now. This is delete layer. So if I were to draw this and decide I don't want it, I'm just going to drag it to this little trash can and let go. Or I can just click on this layer and click on the trash can and it will delete it. We already went over add a new layer. That's this button. This one here is a new folder. So if I wanted to put my two shapes in a folder, I could make a folder, take this shape, drag it into the folder, drag it into the folder. I have to drop it right on top of the folder, which I'm having trouble doing. Okay, and then this shape and put it into the folder. And then if I close the folder, we can see the shapes. They're called folders in here. In Photoshop, they're called groups. So they're called layer groups. So if I create a folder here, let me scoot this folder down here, and then I'll just draw a circle and put it in there. But notice it's automatically in the group if I'm already clicked on the group. So that's that. So these buttons look the same. Again, delete layer, new layer, add a folder or group. And that's nice too because you can put a bunch of things in there and then hide them if you want to get rid of them or bring them back. Or if you have a bunch of layers that have the same name, you can put them all in a folder. We're not going to deal with the rest of these buttons down here except for this one, which is to add a layer mask. You don't need to know what that does yet, but if I click on a layer and click it, it's going to add a white box. This little white box is called a layer mask. And layer masks are used to show or hide things based on the color you see. White means show everything. Now, I'm only telling you this now because people accidentally push this button and make these and they don't know where they came from. So if you accidentally make a layer mask, you can get rid of the layer mask and then make it go away. You'll learn more about what that is later on. We also have layer mask in Photopea. It has the same purpose. If I'm clicked on a layer, when I click it, it adds that white box. If you want to get rid of the layer mask, you can drag it down and get rid of it. So if you accidentally create a layer mask, that's what you do. And then finally, this button here is the Layer Styles button. In Photopea, it's called the EFF, or it looks like the EFF. The word EFF stands for effects, layer style. And if you go to Photoshop, it's an FX like the math button, math function, FX button. but they have options for various things. So for instance, I'm going to click on my B that I brushed, this, and I'm going to hit this FX button, and I'm going to add a stroke. So don't worry about what all these are yet, other than to play with them. We'll learn them in the next lesson, but strokes are basically borders or outlines. So this stroke, I can give it a size, make it bigger, and I can put it on the inside or the outside, all that. So that's a stroke. There's other ones in here too. Bevel makes it kind of look 3D. It's kind of hard to see on this one. You can't really tell, but it's got kind of a 3D look about it. Drop shadow puts a shadow behind it. Can you see that shadow? I don't have my stuff set to the defaults, and so it's kind of hard to see. But you can make this shadow bigger or smaller. You can make it darker and all that with using these little sliders. And then when you hit OK, underneath your layer, you see all of the layer styles. But see, it says the word effects, which is, I guess, why the other program uses the word effects. These also have eyeballs, so you can turn them off as well. But that's those. Now let's go back and look at that in Photoshop. So I'm on my brush layer. I'm going to hit the Effects Layer Styles button, Stroke, and it's going to open up. And it's very similar. You see stroke here. You can change the size. You can pick your color. Oh, I didn't click on it. Oh, yeah, I did. There we go. This one's going on the outside at the moment, but I could switch it. And then I could come and do the bevel. You can tell the bevel a lot more on this one because it has a higher bevel on it. I can add that same drop shadow. There's my shadow. And you can move them around again and click on the word. And then you can mess with these little sliders to change them. And then you hit OK. And then just like the other one, it shows below the layer. Now sometimes you don't see it right away. See, it says EFF and there's an arrow. I'm going to click the arrow and then there they are. Okay. So you can see that the programs, though they are different, are very, very similar. So in your case, you should be able to create this next project I'm going to give you using whichever one that you want. So I'm going to give you a project and you're going to try to recreate it using your name and whatever font you want. Now, when you do that, you're going to have to use your type tool. So let me click on this text layer here where it says text. Now, just because I'm clicked on text doesn't mean I'm getting my text options because I'm on my move tool. So I'm going to click on my type tool. Here's where I can change my font. So you're going to want to find a font that you like when you get ready to do it. They take longer to load in Photopea. Here's my size. I can also change the size by going to my move tool and putting the handles on and then pulling. Okay, so there's that. I'm going to hit my check mark to sit it down. If you use the handles, make sure you use the check mark to sit it down. So you are going to have to do that from within here. That's basically the same if you're doing it in Photoshop. So again, if I'm clicked here with my move tool, go pick which one you want. Make sure you clicked on the right layer. More. Here I am. Click your type tool, look at your top, come and pick whatever font you want. Here's your size. You can go to the drop down or you can point to the TTs and drag and let go, and drag and let go, and drag and let go. And then back to your tool here to pick it up and move it around. Same thing, you can take your transform handles here, change the size if you want, and hit your check mark if you'd like. And then turn those handles off. All right, kind of a long lesson here. Hopefully you've identified these primary tools and you understand the way the layers work, that those orders matter, that we can make things see-through using the opacity slider, that you can put things in folders, that you have to make a layer to brush things on, and that all these other items will make their own layers.